The competition for IEM market gets tougher and tougher day by day, year by year, month by month, especially in the budget range, well under 100 US dollar. And we are seeing here Kefine, which is a brand new release last year. They have released their second IEM to the market, and this is definitely well under 100 US dollar. Kefine Delci. And if we were to look at the build and the construction of this Kefine Delci, I might say that it is definitely among one of the most impressive that I have seen yet for anything under 100 US dollar. Let's just have a closer look. This is CNC machine, okay? Matte colored titanium, I think. And I would just simply admit, I am just, again, the keyword here, impressed, because this is the kind of quality which I would expect for IEM priced well over 300 US dollar or even flagship type of quality. Let me just show you how comfortable it is, okay? So open up like this, and I am using my silicone tips here. By the way, it is not Kefine tips, it is just my Tanjim white bore silicone tips. Put it like that. So very simple. And you can clearly see it is the size is just perfect. It's nice. It sits flushly into my ear. The ergonomic is excellent, you know, despite being metal. It is just so comfortable. I was able to wear it for prolonged period of time. Let me just be very honest. The first time when I receive it, I plug it into my ear and listen to it. I don't like it, okay? This thing is yet another IM which I feel that geared towards being super bassy, or, you know, so heavily focused towards, you know, emphasizing the lower frequency. And if you know anything about me, I always prefer something which is neutral or flatter sounding. And if you listen to the kind of IEM that I like, you probably say that this guy doesn't know how to appreciate bass. But I understand one thing. The market nowadays love big bass, okay? The majority of people love big bass. So I'm just going to put aside my preference and then be objective about how this Delci perform. And like I mentioned, out of the box, it's kind of already very bassy, especially when I use the stock ear tip, which is the silicone tip, narrow bore. And about the only thing which I actually observed, right, that was quite prominent was the mid bass and the sub bass, okay? And I just put it aside for burn in using pink noise, 100 hours, by the way, okay? And then it took probably like almost like 3 days for me to actually burn it. And then in between, I did perform some checkup, let's say spend around 10 to 50 minutes trying to observe if there's any kind of, you know, improvement or any kind of changes. And true indeed, as it aged closer towards 100 hours point of burn-in using the pink noise, the bass, the lower frequency especially, and the overall sound presentation just simply settled down to a point that now let's talk about the sound itself. All right, this thing, simply put, is beautiful sounding, okay? Once I get adjusted to the tone and timbre and the way it presents the sound itself, I just gonna admit openly now that this is probably one of the best which I have heard so far this year yet. And then despite my preference toward being something which is flatter sounding, objectively I would say that the way it handles the sound presentation, let's talk about the tone and the timbre balance itself. The timbre is organic, natural. I do not hear any kind of metallic element to the sound itself. This is the sort of beauty of why you want to use dynamic driver, okay? The traditional dynamic driver. That, you know, the way it handles the transient itself, it's just like so realistic, so natural. And this is pretty much something I would expect, a performance that I would expect from much higher price IEM. The kind of performance which will, you know, put you into a state of being, you know, being able to enjoy something which is highly musical and analytical at the same time. For example, if I were to compare this tonality of this Kefine Delci, if I were to tone down the bass, the lower frequency, and tone down the coloration a bit, I would even say that this is quite comparable to Sennheiser HD series, especially Sennheiser HD 650, okay? So this is definitely smooth sounding, okay? Overall, smoothness is there, crispness is there. And when we talk about the sound itself, we talk also about, let's have a look at the energy. How does it present the dynamic transient itself? It just simply flow. It is just like graceful. That's how the best. And if I were to compare with some of the other IEM which I have tested so far recently, okay, I would even say that this is a bit more relaxed, okay, when it comes to the overall sound presentation. It does sound exciting, but never too much. There's maturity to the sound itself, okay? The way it handles the dynamic range, anywhere from lower frequency, upper frequency, all the way to the mid-range and all that coverage. So when we talk about dynamic range, let's just talk about the mid-range itself, okay? I must admit there's a slight coloration there, okay? I feel that the mid-range is not as neutral as how I prefer it, okay? But the coloration is something which makes it even more appealing for musical reason. So for example, when I listen to certain type of female vocal, especially Diana Krall, again, my favorite, which is contralto, chesty type of vocal, or even high-pitched vocal like Alison Krauss, you know, or even falsetto, male vocal, which is very high-pitched, or even baritone tenor. You know, those vocal sounded so pleasant. It is the kind of vocal which you know, not exactly neutral, but it does sound natural. It sounds organic, and then it is definitely immersive. You know, it speaks to you. It speaks to the listener. So when I listen jazz using this, I was just simply like enjoying my moment listening to the music, okay? And at the same time, I am hearing quite a bit of, you know, very well presentation of the way it present the attack of the instrument. I must admit, it is kind of not as sharp or crispy as how I prefer it, especially when subjected to listening to something like, you know, classical, Vivaldi, or even instrumental. It's kind of a bit smoothened out to a point that, you know, it lacked a bit of, you know, accuracy and transparency there, but it doesn't bother me because in return, what I get is a smooth listening experience end to end from the attack to the decay state. So it is definitely applicable even for traditional sort of sound instrument. So, but then again, when I switch to something which is a bit more modern, something like Madonna, which contains a lot of electronic or even Depeche Mode or even let's say Kraftwerk, this Delci showed quite admirable flexibility to handle all type of music genre. I would even say that if you need something which is flexible, this Delci has it. The sound stage, the imaging, okay. I might say that, you know, I prefer that this Delci would have slightly larger sort of width, okay, with the soundstage itself, but at least it sounded open, spacious, and the holographic element of it. I would just simply say that it is perhaps more towards being traditional stereo rather than holographic, so it is more suitable for listening just to music, but not so much for gaming. Driving this Delci is pretty much a very straightforward affair. Despite the slightly higher impedance rating, as I have shown you earlier, this Delci sounded already amazing when attached directly to my phone here, which is Xiaomi Mi 90 through this 3.5mm single-ended. I would just simply say that the kind of volume and headroom which was available to me is definitely something which I would consider as, you know, very good. But how does it scale with different type of, you know, source? How does it scale with power? And I am happy to say that this Delci is definitely just like many other very well tuned or very well built IEM, was able to appreciate different kind of sound partner, and it gets improved. And I must admit that, you know, I was really impressed of how it sounded like when I attached this Delci to my FIO BTR 15 here, the one that I use the most, okay, I must admit. And then of course, it sounded rich and analytical at the same time when I attach it to this Hebe FC6 here, okay. I was able to enjoy, even improve, all right, definition of resolution and imaging with these two, okay, especially, and also this, you know, FIO Q15 here, okay, despite running on 3.5mm single-ended, all three of them perfect for Delci. And of course, I also attach it to my desktop DAC amp, which you see in front here. I spent quite a lot of time listening to it using this JDS Lab Atom 2 and DAC 2, and the sound is just simply impressive. It does reflect the kind of improvement each different partner offered. And another way of improving the sound of this Delci is that swapping the cable, aside from swapping the ear tip. So in my case here, I have already mentioned earlier that I have found that using white bore tips, in this case I use Tangim Zero white bore tip here, which is silicone. And until today, it is still there because this is the best combination for ear tip for me. It gives me the kind of, you know, it does help to dampen a bit, you know, to control some of the bass, the lower frequency, and also it release a bit more of upper frequency extension, okay? And here, my own cable here, this Valkinas cable, which I released recently. And this is where it really matches when I start scaling it up with different type of listening partner, especially because I need balance when I attach to this desktop DAC M here, or even this Q15 or even BTR15, and this is where things open up. Improve resolution and imaging, the sort of fluidity in the way it handle the dynamic. So all in all, I would say that this Delci is super flexible. I did mention earlier that the competition is very tough, especially for under 100 US dollar. So let's just have a look at the competition. So what you see here is not all of them, okay? It's just some of the IEM which I have tested in combination between somewhere this year and also previous year, and some of the most prominent ones, so that you get an idea how does this compare. And let's just cut to the chase, okay? Let's just pay attention to 3 IEM, right, which is quite comparable to this Delci. You would notice that, the 4 sound element, the score there, 9899, is pretty much identical to Celeste Pandamon 2, which I have reviewed recently, FIO FD11, and especially SIMGOT EA500LM. So let me just spend a bit of time to talk about the differences, especially with the earlier generation of this sort of similar tuning. Probably most of you would remember Blonde or still use BL03. Okay, I would even say that, especially when we talk about the sound of this Delci out of the box, it has that kind of element, emphasis of lower frequency and mid-range, similar to Blonde BL03, but the similarity ends there. Okay, first and foremost is that, to me, at least to my hearing, BL03 is just simply a slow performer when it comes to presenting the sound. The way it handles the dynamic transient and everything, alright, it's just sluggish to a point that I would even say the lower frequency appeared bloated to my ears. And this is definitely not bloated, okay? I want to spend a bit more of time comparing this Delci with one particular competition. And the reason is that because I think both of them are pretty much almost identical in many ways, and that is SIMGOT EA500LM, which I reviewed recently, and so happened to be the highest scoring IEM among under 100 US dollar category so far. And have a look there. On the scoring sheet, they are pretty much identical, okay? But let's just see how they differ when it comes to listening experience itself. So in order to achieve that, I use this split cable you see here, okay? Pretty much what I have done is that I attach both of them together using similar kind of ear tip, using their own stock cable, okay? And then attach it to Hebe FC6 here. I spent like half a day using this, and also the remaining half a day, I spent listening using this JDS lab here, which is my stack. So what I can say is that the main differences, okay, between these two, I would just simply say that Delci is definitely the one that offers more density, volume, and richness to the lower frequency as compared to EA500LM. So what I'm trying to say is that if you love something which is bass heavy, all right, Delci would appear to be the one to go for, because like I mentioned earlier, despite being bass heavy, the good thing about it is that, and I am not the type of person who like bassy IM, but I must admit, objectively, the way it presents the lower frequency is just amazing, okay? It does not goes into element of being bloated or boomy or anything like that, like this heads here, which I reviewed recently. This thing is like a subwoofer in your head, okay? And this thing is way boomy and bloated, especially when I subject a lot of power to it. But this Delci and this EA500LM, both of them just simply remain stable, even when subjected to high power of, milliwatt. And they present the lower frequency with the kind of richness, density, commanding presence, which I really love, okay? I can appreciate, despite my preference of having something a lot more neutral. And then, talking about the way it presents the upper frequency, the focus of this EA400LM is more towards, at least to my ear, all right, the mild differences is that it's a bit more crisper sounding, okay? Whereas this Delci is a bit more smoother, okay, the way it presents the decay. The amount of resolution, the amount of detail, macro and micro detail remains the same, but EA400LM is just a bit more crisper, and this one is a bit more smoother.